Hi everyone, and welcome to the Truth Behind TV Crime Drama webinar. The webinar will be led by Professor Ian Turner. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please drop them in the Q&A box and we'll run through them at the end. So let's get started. First, would you like to introduce yourself, Ian?
Thanks, Jess, and good evening, everybody. It's an absolute pleasure to see you all here. My name's Ian Turner, and I'm the head of Forensics and Biomedical Science at the University of Derby, where I've been working for over 20 years. And I got into forensic science because of my love of TV crime dramas, and it's an absolute pleasure to talk to you a little bit about the science behind these TV crime dramas themselves. So I think you have access to the chat. And if you do, it'd be really interesting, just as a bit of a warm up, it's been a long day, if you just drop in the chat what your favourite TV drama is, if there's one that you enjoy watching, and maybe some of those will come up in the talk today. Okay, so let's get started. So what I want to do today is talk through a few different aspects I see in TV crime dramas, and I'm not going to be here saying how terrible and rubbish they are, because I love them as much as you do. I'm going to choose a few key themes that I see in different TV dramas and explain some of the kind of accuracy elements associated with those. But first of all, I want to test your knowledge a little bit. So I've got in here 4 true or false questions that I see relate to things I see a lot in TV crime dramas. So my first one, you can see on the screen, true or false. So blood will fluoresce, so that means glow up, under alternative light sources, ultraviolet. So I want you to think, do you think that's something that's true or false in the real world of forensic science? And the picture you can see there is from an episode of CSI Miami, the crime show, where you can see a blood stain glowing up. And the answer is actually false. So blood doesn't fluoresce under ultraviolet. Most other bodily fluids do, like saliva and urine and seminal fluid and things, but blood actually doesn't fluoresce. However, what often happens is when there's blood at a crime scene, it's often attempted to be cleaned up or wiped away. And things like bleach and other common cleaning fluids, now they do fluoresce and they do glow up. We've actually at the University of Derby got a complete dark room with crime lights all across the electromagnetic spectrum, including infrared and ultraviolet, which we use to fluoresce crime scene fluids. So well done if you got that question right, and there'll be a few more coming shortly in the presentation. Okay, so let's move on to talk about crime scene dramas. So I've chosen 3 topics that I feel are replicated in lots of crime scene dramas, which warrant a further discussion. So the first topic I want to talk to you about is related to the show Luther, but it could be any other show. So Luther is a really, really interesting show starring Idris Elba, something that I really, really enjoy. And if you haven't seen it, I do recommend it. So what you can see on here on the left-hand side of the screen, where it says the word Luther, is the chief protagonist, Detective Luther, in his trademark jacket and tie. Now, what you can see in the top right is Luther, this is from season 1, investigating a crime scene. And if you can see on your screen, you can probably make out him sitting on a bed. So looking at a victim on a bed, and you can probably see the couple of yellow triangles on there. Now, these yellow triangles are used to identify where evidence may be found, and often associated with crime scene photography and those kind of things. And then just beneath that, you can see Idris Elba once again looking at some evidence back in the police control room. So the reason I've chosen Luther and what I'm talking about here is the process. So what I see in a lot of crime scene dramas is that the chief protagonist, the detective or whoever that may be, is often so invested in the crime that they talk through the whole process. So they go to the crime scene, as you can see in the top left. They may even help gather the evidence. And then they may go to the lab, or they may go somewhere like a mortuary and they may examine that evidence. And then they take that back to the police station and discuss that with the colleagues. And then finally, they may get involved in arresting or even interviewing the suspects, in order to get a confession and such like before it goes to court. Now, obviously, that's really good drama because you've got a character that you can relate to. But sadly, that is not how things work in the UK. The experience is quite different. This is more like the reality. So most crimes are reported initially to the police. You can see them in the middle left. So the police then would go to the crime scene initially. And if they see something like, a homicide or, something like that, they would, cordon off the crime scenes. That means that yellow and black tape. And then they may call in a crime scene investigator, which is a CSI, which you can see on the bottom left. So the crime scene investigator would go into the crime scene, and their job is purely to collect, gather and record. So by record, I mean take photographs, draw sketches, make notes of the weather and all the other ambient conditions. Then they would take photographs of individual items of evidence. Then they would take those away from the crime scene and bag those up. So then they give this evidence back to the police force, making sure that they correctly record anything. Then it's back to the police force again to make decisions about what they want to do with this evidence. And they may use forensic scientists, which you can see in the bottom right. So the forensic scientists will be the ones who do the tests on the evidence. So this is not a blank slate. The police would ask specific questions like, can you determine who, if anybody, touched this firearm? So they may undertake some DNA testing, for example. Can you determine if this red stain on this lipstick is blood? So they ask specific questions. So the forensic scientists will then answer those questions. They write scientific reports. Then they give this information back to the police force. And then the police force themselves would make the decision about what to do next. Do they need to interview people? Could they arrest anybody? And ultimately that moves into the criminal justice procedure, our courts of law. So, it's not quite as exciting as what you see in Luther and other crime scene dramas, but that's how the process works in the UK. And it's actually quite similar in other countries as well, like America, which I know many of these crime dramas are focused in. So just a little bit more on forensics versus CSI. And I think this is a really important decision. If any of you are thinking about this as a future career path, what's the difference between the two? So, in terms of education, the forensic science degrees like the one we offer at Derby trains you to do both of these things. But ultimately, a CSI is more of a practical, hands-on, outside, facing the scenes of crime role. You need to be very a good critical thinker. You need to be very logical and methodical. You need to have a good eye for detail, and you need to be an absolute stickler for procedure and processes. So collecting the evidence in the correct and systematic way. Make sure you record everything accurately. So when this goes into the court of law, which could be a long time later, people are completely can recapture the scene and do the evidence. Forensic scientists, on the other hand, tend to be more lab-based. They do occasionally go to scenes of crime. They need training in the molecular biology and genetics, the analytical chemistry techniques, in order to examine the types of evidence you may see, which could be biological fluids, paint flakes, glass fragments, tire treads, and increasingly, computer hard drives. So they need to, there's complete difference between the two. So in both, you do need an underpinning of science, but different types of science. CSI would do some of the basic, chemical tests to determine what stains and things need to be collected, whereas a forensic science may use some of the more detailed analytical instruments that are involved. So they're both important roles, very important roles, but they are quite distinct, and that's the case across the globe. It's probably worth saying at this time just a word about the criminal justice system, which I think is quite interesting. So in crime scene dramas, we see a lot of the courtroom. And, if you look at the shot you can see on the screen, in the right, you can see Her Majesty's Courts and Tribunal Services. And you can see two types of court, the Magistrates Court and the Crown Court. So the Magistrate Court is the one without the jury, and where, non-custodial offences can be treated. But everyone has the right to be trialed by jury. In fact, but the most serious of crimes do initially go to magistrate court before they're referred to the Crown Court. So here's a question for you, a sneaky question. Do you know how long it takes on average from when somebody is arrested and when charged with a crime before they end up in court and the trial is completely finished. Any ideas how long that takes? I'm guessing that you're going to put a large number in there. So the average is about 192 days. So, you're getting close to 2/3 of a year. So that sounds actually maybe not as bad as what you thought, but actually this is because many crimes are charged and resolved on the spot. So if you can imagine somebody who's charged with a public disorder offence, being drunk on the street, they can be charged and given on the spot fine. So their time since being charged and resolved is 0 days. Whereas some of the more serious crimes, unfortunately, the backlog is, 3 and 4 years. And there's currently 72,163 cases in the backlog with Her Majesty's Courts and Tribunal Service. And that's exactly why we need more people like you. Well, we need more forensic scientists, we need more criminologists, we need more experts in law and more police practitioners in order to do. But you see that the justice procedure is quite complicated. We've got the youth custody service, we've got the probation service. A big part of our work in our courses is dealing with the offenders themselves, helping them rehabilitate and getting back into society. So, it's a much more important role than just catching people who may have undertaken wrongdoing. So here's my second question. True or false? CSIs, not the forensic scientists, primarily investigate homicides. And by homicides, I know it's an American term, but any crime that involves the death of another human being, so murder, manslaughter, etc., etc. Is that what they primarily investigate? True or false? So the answer here is absolutely false. So CSI investigate all crimes on order of the police. In essence. So, thankfully, there are, few murders relative to the population of any given geographical area. So we don't get too many of those. Much more common are things like aggravated assault, some burglaries, a lot of volume crime, which includes things like car crime. There is quite often CSIs are called to a death. And a death that may be classed as suspicious, but often it's natural causes. And I am about to say something which is a little graphic, just as a warning. For example, someone who lives alone passes away, and they haven't been discovered for quite a long period of time. And of course, the body may not be in a good state at that point. So when the CSI is called, they have to, when the police are called, they call the CSI to establish cause of death and all those kind of things. So most of the crimes that we do deal with are not homicides. So of course we do have to do those. So well done if you got those right. I can see some correct answers in the chat. So topic 2, and this is a biggie for me. So this one I'm going to focus on CSI TV show. So the CSI TV show started, way back in the 1990s. Started off with CSI set in Las Vegas, and we had CSI Miami, CSI New York. We even had CSI Cyber looking at computer crime. It actually ran to over 800 episodes, which is phenomenal. And I often find it difficult when I'm talking to younger people about how big this show was. So we're in the era of, 5 or 6 channels, no streaming services. This was the show that everybody watched. In its peak, CSI was attracting 60 million viewers in America. It was an absolutely massive show. And it's really fantastic. And I've got a lot to be thankful for it, which I'll share with you in a minute. So why am I picked on this show? So let me show you a shot from the TV show. So what you've got here is a screenshot from CSI. So this is actually an episode where they go to a convention, and unfortunately they find a deceased victim, who's found inside a pool, and they've gone up to their room to investigate. And what you can see here are 3 of the CSIs, or the police force, looking around the room for any clues or evidence. and you may notice something, but I won't say anything at this moment. Let's carry on into the episode. So this is the same episode, and what you can see here is the victim being examined at a post-mortem. So you can see two of the investigators hunched over the body, and you can see that they're looking at the back of the head. They've clearly found something. And if I remember the episode correctly, the person fell backwards and bashed their head on the side of the pool, so looking for some kind of trauma wound. And then a final shot. So this is two of the CSI investigators in the laboratory looking for some evidence. And you can see that they've got some sort of low-powered microscope, probably looking at some trace hairs or fibres or something in there. So did you notice anything about those pictures? Let me just skim back them again. So even with the most simple versions of crime scene investigation, you know that we deal with evidence that's very, very, very small. So hairs on your head, saliva that comes out of your mouth, finger marks and other trace elements. And we as crime scene investigators are just as likely to leave those in crime scenes as the people who have been in the crime scenes. So well done, the person who said no suits. You're absolutely right. And this is something you see in a lot of crime scene dramas, that people don't wear any protective clothing. Now, I absolutely get it, of course, because, it would be a really boring television if everybody was in complete suits. You wouldn't be able to tell who anybody was. And with the face masks off, everyone would be speaking like this, and you wouldn't be able to hear anybody. So I get it's not good television. But then you see screenshots like that one. So this is an actual CSI suit. So we affectionately call these bunny suits. So a white suit that covers you from ankle to head. You can see that there's a hat up. You may not be able to quite see that underneath that hat, the person is actually wearing a hairnet to make sure any trace hairs don't fall out. Then they've got booty covers, so covering their shoes so they don't leave any foot marks on the crime scene. They're wearing gloves. I mean, often they actually wear double gloves, because when you sweat, you got two types of sweat. You got a water-based sweat containing amino acids, and a sebaceous fatty sweat. And you're very hot. It can actually transmit through the first layer of gloves. They often wear double gloves, and it's quite difficult to actually do the manual task with those gloves on. Then they've got a face mask over, and this is because as we talk, saliva leaves our mouth. I mean, it's quite disgusting to talk about, but saliva actually travels from your mouth when you're talking normally about a meter. Quite gross. I think you're probably grateful I'm on a screen now rather than talking in front of you. And then we can wear goggles as well, depending on the health and safety, which is very important in crime scenes. Forensic scientists, slightly different. You'd wear a full lab coat buttoned up to the top, glasses and gloves. And if you're in a safe or secure DNA lab, then you'd be wearing the same kind of things that you can see here. In fact, they're so strict in the big forensic labs that they have different coloured suits for different areas. So in DNA analysis, the bit where we get the DNA out of the blood or the semen, the people who do that job and make larger volumes of it, they wear one colour, like yellow garb. And the people who do the profiling, they will wear a completely different colour garb to make sure there's no chance of the evidence being cross-contaminated. And what you can see here is a picture of probably one of my favourite crime scene shows, which is A Silent Witness, and that's Amelia Fox, who's a pathologist in the TV show, actually wearing a crime scene suit and booties. She hasn't got her hair cover up, which will let her off. She's actually got a crime scene kit there in front of her as well, which is a metallic silver case containing universals, magnifying glasses, measuring devices, a small ultraviolet torch. And at Derby, we use all the authentic devices. We have all the correct PPE. We even use actual proper police evidence bags, crime scene kit, number markers to give students the absolute authentic experience. The other thing that you may have noticed in those crime scenes, let me just flick back here. I mean, some of you may be having this talk in your own home. And if you look around your own home, I'd be surprised if it looked this tidy. Look how tidy the carpet is, for example. And often in forensics TV shows, we see that the crime scenes are very, very, very clean. and the investigators go in and gather, look around for 5 minutes and find the purple fibre on the end of the bedstead, or that, that finger mark on the back of the mirror. Of course, it's nothing like that in reality. So what's more likely to be happening is something like this. So this is actually from a true case. So this is from 2016 in Italy. Basically what happened was neighbours reported that they smelling a horrible smell from the neighbouring villa. So the police were called. The police entered the building. I'll tell you what they revealed in a minute. And when they realised what they're dealing with, they took the woman out of the scene and called in the CSI. So the woman was very, very confused, and her clothes and general appearance and her own smell suggest that she'd been neglected herself for a long time. So she had very poor hygiene. And she'd suggested that her husband was upstairs getting dressed, getting ready. And sadly, the husband upstairs was deceased, and had been deceased a long time. In fact, he was semi-mummified. I've chosen not to put a picture of this on the PowerPoint slides, but if anybody wants to know about it, it's a publicly accessible journal paper, which you can see at the bottom there. And the reason I've chosen this particular example is just to show you what some crime scenes look like. So on the left, you can see the living room, and you can see it's an absolute mess. So there's stuff everywhere, boxes of stuff. There's even drugs lying around there. Now, most of those drugs happen to be medicinal drugs rather than illegal drugs. But still, what the police and the CSI have got is a mummified remains upstairs, and they've got no idea whether that person died through natural causes or there's something suspicious at work. And they have to process the scene with the same rigour, irrespective. Likewise, in the place where the body was found, you can see in here, the bathroom. The bathroom is absolutely disgusting. And I'm sure you're very glad we haven't got smell-o-vision, on this particular webinar, like how dirty it is. So what I'm really trying to show you here, that real forensic science is quite grisly business, in some respects. Yeah. So that's my second thing, contamination and cleanliness of signs. So my third, true or false? Fingerprints can be found on most surfaces. Do you think that one's true or false? Can you get fingerprints from most things? I mean, the reason I've chosen this one is that you do see people leave fingerprints from almost every area on crime scene shows. And the answer for this one is, once again, false. So it's false, sadly. So fingerprints can be found on lots of surfaces. Smooth surfaces for sure, glass, plastic, absolutely. But even stuff like fabrics, wood, and such like. But rough surfaces are much harder to lift fingerprints from. So, broken wood will be an example. Cement or concrete and those kind of things are really, really tough, because you need direct contact with all parts of the finger to transfer that sebaceous fluid, and it needs to be there long enough in order to be drawn apart. Of course, there are always extreme examples there. You can actually get fingerprints from bodies, so from the actual victim themselves, as you can see here. You can lift fingerprints from dead bodies, and sometimes we have to undertake a very grisly business of taking the finger off the body in order to get a fingerprint. But also you can get fingerprints from flesh using photography, like the stuff we have here at Derby. There's actually a series of chemical techniques that you can use to get fingerprints off most surface. Things like paper, we use ninhydrin, plastic, we use super glue, fuming. And actually we've got a fully developed fingerprint suite here at Derby, which we use to lift off these various types of fingerprints. So fingerprints can't be found on every surface, but we can try them in most surface. Fingerprints actually last a long time. One of my favourite cases was a body found in the Lake District in the UK. It was in one of the lakes. It was pulled up in a period of drought. It was wrapped in a black bin bag, and the body was identified and found to be somebody who went missing over 20 years ago, and they've been in the water a large portion of that time. The bag was taken out and dried slowly, very, very slowly under the right humidity conditions. Then using super glue fuming, they managed to lift a fingerprint because of the fatty parts of your fingerprint, which don't wash off in the water. And they actually managed to get a match of the fingerprint to the person who touched that bag. 20 years sitting on a bag. That's absolutely amazing. So some of those fanciful things you see in your crime scene dramas are clearly true. So my final topic is going to be talking about the CSI effect. So this is true to any one of these crime dramas that you talk about. And some of you kindly shared which shows you like, and you in a way have contributed to the CSI effect. So let me tell you what the CSI effect is. So what I've got here is a cartoon. And the cartoon, just let me read it out in case anybody can't read it on the side, says, so you got a lawyer present with his defendant sitting in a box, and he says, there are 10 eyewitnesses. He has motive, and my client pled guilty. He is guilty. And then you got the jury in the background saying, but where's the DNA? So what this is trying to prove the point is that people, general people, have become so used to crime scene dramas that they become basically armchair experts in aspects of forensics, or at least they think they have. So the multitude of crime scene dramas is having a positive impact on the general public. This is called the CSI effect. So let me give you an illustration, then a specific example. So this is when the crime CSI effect was first coined, named after CSI, the TV show. And what you can see here is an extract of a scientific paper. I'm just going to read a very small piece of it out to you. Mysterious green ooze is injected into a brightly illuminated and humming machine. 10 seconds later, a printout containing a complete biography of the substance is at the fingertips of an attractive young investigator who exclaims, "We have found it." And then to move on, with all the advances in technology, how can crime rates be anything but plummeting as would-be criminals cringe at the idea of leaving the smallest speck of themselves at a crime scene? Surely there are very few serious crimes that go unpunished in today's world of high-tech, fast-paced gadgetry. So this is making the point that with these crime shows, people's expectations and perceptions have completely changed around CSI. And this is not just a buzzword, a thing. This has been studied loads. And this lovely little illustration gives you a couple of examples about what people expect from watching TV shows. So the first question says, how often do forensic experts find usable evidence at crime scenes? So in almost every TV show that you watch, the investigators find some evidence. Now, they may not be able to use it at that time. They always find something. Whereas the reality is only 5 to 10% of criminal cases involve biological evidence that could be DNA tested. So where's the DNA? Well, there may not be DNA, or at least DNA that can't be found. So if people go in expecting DNA to be found, then sadly, only one time out of 10, there'll be the truth. How often are forensic techs conclusive? So you see DNA profiles providing matching in all these shows, but only 30% of cases have DNA that can tie to another crime. So, in real forensics, in the UK, we have a national DNA database. So if we collect some DNA from a crime scene, we can put it in the database and see if we have a match. But if the person who left that DNA is not already on the database, then we've got nothing to match against. Then we're into two scenarios. We either need to have a suspect where you can collect their DNA and see if there's a match, or we have to do something really, really fancy, which is called familial searching. So see if anybody in the database has got DNA that matches part of that DNA. So you share DNA with your parents, your grandparents, and your siblings. So the CSI effect is so important that we actually call it lots of different things. So just going to give you a couple of examples from this slide. One key effect is on jurors. So jurors have been known to offer greater credibility to forensic witnesses because they see them on the TV. They trust them more. They think they know more about science. And perhaps the most bizarre thing, there's a big case study from Italy where they took crimes that were committed pre-CSI TV shows, and they matched all the other things like the age of the person who did the crime, the type of the crime, etc., etc. And they looked at those same kind of crimes after CSI TV show and found that jurors are more likely to give acquittals or lower sentences because of their knowledge of CSI TV shows, which is just crazy. Shows how popular these shows are. Two other things that are to note on here. First of all, the victim's effect. So victims of crime understand forensic testing and they expect certain things to be done. And sadly, in the UK, forensics is costed. So it's costed, and we can't afford to do all these DNA tests on every crime. In fact, in some police forces, things like violent crime, like car crime, unless blood is found, they wouldn't even send a CSI out to gather any evidence. And I particularly like the criminal effect. Smart criminals. That criminals are aware, you're making sure they wear gloves and double gloves and cover their faces when they go to crimes because they're aware. I see that as a challenge that you as future forensic scientists and other students can meet in finding better testing techniques. And perhaps the best well-known one is the educator effect, that more and more people are interested in forensic science as a career path because they watch these TV shows, which is in part why you're here today. Okay, so we're getting close towards the end now. So a final true or false. So here we've got another excellent show. We've got NCIS, and it's Abby Scutio on the screen. So it takes 2.5 hours to generate a DNA profile. Do you think that's right, true, or false? And the answer is it's false. So don't get me wrong. Genetic testing is so fast nowadays. You know, it's improved massively in my career time frame. And if you were doing something like a paternity test, which does come under the forensic umbrella, you can get a result in a few days to 3 days. If anybody's plugged their DNA into one of these ancestry tests, that can take anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks. If you've had any health complications or screening, normally, you know, somewhere between 2 to 12 weeks. But in criminal cases, it can take months. In fact, there's a massive backlog in the UK and the US in order to get DNA testing done. So the actual test itself doesn't take very long, but going through the correct procedures and going to the correct accredited lab takes an incredibly long time, which is another call to arms why we need more future students like that you can do these particular things. Okay, so they're my three kind of key things that I think crime scene dramas show, which are worth talking about. The overall process, the contamination, the lack of protective clothing and the cleanliness of the scenes, and the positive impact they've had on the criminal justice process, particularly young students coming in to study forensic science. So here at Derby, we have a range of courses which I think are relevant to forensic science. Forensic science and forensic science with criminology, which are very science-based courses. Forensic psychology, which deals with the criminal mind and the rehabilitation process. And of course, psychology itself. Professional policing and policing investigations, which is more of the front end, instigating the actual overview of investigating the crime and intersection with the criminal justice procedure. And obviously those who special in the criminal justice service itself, criminology and law, training the next batch of solicitors, lawyers, and those involved with the probation service. So there are courses. I did see several questions jump through in the chat, and now I'll be happy to take any questions that you have. Thank you for listening.
Super, thanks, Ian. We've had a few questions this evening. So the first one is, do you think choosing a career in police or forensics just based on the amount of interest in shows is silly?
Absolutely not. I mean, we have a great range of students at Derby, and almost all of them original interest has been sparked by TV shows. And of course, from that interest, you need to make sure you're absolutely certain that it's the thing you want to do. And the next step I'd recommend is coming to an open day, a place like Derby, to have a look around the facilities, hear more about the course structure, and see if those things are really interested into you. I mean, even if you're not talking about forensics, the reason I became a biologist originally, and that's because I love nature-based TV shows, David Attenborough, and that's what sparked my interest. Hard work and sweat will get you a long way in your degree and career, but you've got to absolutely love and care about what you do. And if that care has come from TV shows, then albeit.
Super, thanks, Ian. The next one is, how does someone know if they have the stomach for CSI or forensics?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So, first of all, if you don't have the stomach, the forensic science side of it is a bit more removed away from the grisliness of the crime scenes. CSI, you do unfortunately need to have a strong stomach. If you ever did become a CSI, you tend to start off on volume crime before you move up to the more serious types of crime. The only way of really knowing is testing yourself in a safe space. In there, I talked about a scientific article, and that did include some. I don't recommend you look for pictures of dead bodies or anything online, of course, but look in some scientific textbooks, some forensic science textbooks, and that give you a sense about how you feel. My general experience is that the mental well-being is more important than the physical reaction. You're dealing with some obviously horrible crimes, and the victims of those crimes, and you need to be very careful about those. At Derby, we very carefully scaffold students through this experience with appropriate triggers and warning, for things that we're going to be talking about, to make sure people are emotionally and physically prepared for what they may be dealing with as a career path.
Amazing, great answer. The other one is, are there any other TV shows or films that you would recommend watching?
I thought someone might ask that. Well, I like all TV. The show I like most at the moment is Department Q. It's a Netflix stream series set in Scotland, where a group of very grisly old Scottish detective investigates a crime based on a series of books. I thought that was excellent TV watching. Most of the things I mentioned today in terms of forensic accuracy are flagged off, but it's good viewing.
Perfect. I might have to look at that one myself. The next question is, what does a typical day look like as a forensic scientist? So how much time is spent in the lab or on a crime scene or in court?
Yeah, so start off with forensic scientists. They would spend, you'd go in as a junior, as you'd expect, and you'd spend all day, every day in the lab, more or less. So that'd be a mixture of actually running experiments and then writing up the reports for those experiments. So forensic scientists spend most of their time. As you work through your career path, you may become something called a reporting officer, and they tend to be the ones who go to court or interface with the police at least. And the more senior you are, the more times you'd go to court. It's only the most serious trials where you're often called to court, So, I expect for most reporting officers, you're looking at 4 to 5 times a year, probably. Most of the time, your report is so accurate and good that there's no questions that are needed. A CSI's job is much more varied. You're normally based at a police force. You're a civilian rather than a police officer. And then you go out to crimes as and when needed. So some days you may have little to deal with or just go out to some volume crime. Other days you may be involved in a serious crime. I have a close family member who's a CSI, and she's involved in some very serious crimes, and sometimes they last days or even weeks. I do remember one Christmas where she was involved in a very serious crime involving a serial killer in the UK, where she spent, 9 days in a particular house, going on her hands and knees, looking for traces of hairs and fibres through carpets to see if they match any of the victims. So very, very varied. And CSIs do go to court, but it's much rarer than forensic scientists.
Perfect. Thanks, Ian. There's been a couple of questions that are kind of around the similar, entry requirements theme. So I'll try and combine them together. So the first one is what A levels are recommended and the grade requirements for forensics at Derby. And then there's also, can a career in forensics be done with a more general biology and chemistry background? Is that okay to cover them all in one, if possible, please?
Yep, sure. Absolutely. So to study forensics or forensic criminology, we like you to have a science background. So if you're doing traditional A levels, that would either be biology or chemistry. If you're still at the place where you can choose, both would be fantastic. But don't worry, we expect most of our students have only done one or the other, and we take you up from first principles a good pace in order to do that. So biology or chemistry. We also really value those who've done BTECs or T levels in applied science. Many of our students do that as well. And our entry requirements are currently 104 UCAS points. But if you're worried about those UCAS points, please don't. We do have a foundation year. And also, we're always happy to discuss grade entry with individual applicants. And my email that was on the last slide, which I can put back up in a second, has, take a picture of that. If you've got any particular personal queries or comments about your own situation, be happy to help.
Perfect, thanks, Ian. We'll also post Ian's email address in the final comments at the end. There's just two other questions, and if we can try and squeeze those in. The next one is, if I study forensic science, do I need to know from the start if I want to be a forensic scientist or in the CSI?
Absolutely not. So we train for both. I mean, many people change their mind anyway as they go through. So, in a typical first year, we do some biology and some chemistry, obviously in the context of forensics evidence. We do some forensic modules, so actually lab-based techniques, fingerprint examination, document examination, time tread removal, paint fleck examination, and also we do some crime scenes. We have a forensic training facility, a crime scene house with 7 crime scene rooms, and including a blood spatter room. We have 2 crime scene vehicles. We even have a burial site. So we take students out to do different crime scenes. So we give you the experience for all of those.
Perfect, thanks, Ian. There's been an additional question, since the last time I said there was only 2, so I'm going to try and combine them. Would psychology A level be okay instead of biology or chemistry? And also, I've heard that you need a medical degree to go into forensics. Is there any truth in this?
The psychology question is a difficult one. So our entry required does ask for biology or chemistry, and that's really a question that I'd like to have a personal discussion, whoever raised it for. So, I'd recommend that you contact me individually to talk about your individual circumstances there. But don't worry, there's always a way you can come and study, even if that does mean taking a foundation year to study. In terms of medicine, that is not true. The only medical requirement in forensics, if you want to be a forensic pathologist, so the people who do the post-mortems, the lead people, so the route into that is a degree, then fast track into medicine, and then become a pathology expert. It's probably one of the most qualified career paths in the world, actually, in terms of the length of time. You do not need a medicine degree to do forensics. Interestingly, forensics can be a fast track into medicine itself. Many of our students have, done a forensic degree and become really interested in that side and take it to fast track into medicine.
Amazing. Thanks, Ian. That's all the questions we had this evening. So thank you for such an interesting presentation. We've just posted, or we will post in, Ian's email address into this chat as well. So if people do want to copy that out, they can. And I'll just pass back to Ian, say your final goodbye for the evening.
Yeah, so thank you. Thank you for your attention. Happy to take any questions. And I guess I'm giving you permission to go and watch some crime scene dramas this evening. Enjoy yourself. Thank you.